Hey there everyone, Mychal A. Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology, and I want to invite you to join us in the free Horary Astrology Masterclass, which is happening Sunday, December 7th, 2025 at 2 p.m. EST. In this masterclass, I'm going to be going through everything that you need to know about Horary Astrology as a practice, and also about why nothing else within our astrological practice prepares us to answer the concrete questions of our clients like Horary Astrology does. And that doesn't matter if we're practicing Horary Astrology specifically, or if we're practicing natal astrology. Horary Astrology prepares us to be concrete and accurate within the information that we share with our clients. In this masterclass, we're going to be covering the true nature of Horary Astrology, which is predictive. We're also going to talk about when and when not to use Horary Astrology, because some people think that you could use Horary for anything. I'm also going to be sharing with you my step-by-step rubric or framework for how we actually dive into Horary delineation. And I'm also going to be giving you steps so that you can know how to go from just somebody who is curious about Horary Astrology to diving deeply into the heart of competent Horary astrological practice. So, if you are interested in any of these things, please join us this Sunday, December 7th, 2025 for our Horary Astrology free live masterclass with yours truly. And this is completely in preparation for our upcoming Horary Astrology Certification Program, which begins January 10th, 2026. So to sign up for our free event, please make sure to click the link down below in the description box, and I cannot wait to see you there. All right, everyone. So we are about to dive into part 2 of our interpretation of this Horary chart, where the client asks the question, should we marry? And if you did not catch part 1, you can go and click the link down below, and that will take you to part 1 of this particular question. But in this part 2, we're going to be diving into the Quesited. So in part 1, we spoke about the Querent and how the Querent is symbolized by the planet that specifically is ruling the first house cusp. And in this case, with the first house cusp being at 22 degrees Libra, 18 minutes, the ruler of that first house is our Venus over here at 27 degrees Pisces, 55 minutes in the 6th house, or rather, essentially dignified Venus at 27 degrees Pisces, 55 minutes, and accidentally debilitated in the 6th house of stress and slavery. And now we're going to talk about the Quesited, or the person who she is asking about. Now, within a Horary chart, or within a Horary question about love, or any sort of intimate one-on-one relationship at all, between two people who aren't related, when we talk about intimate romantic connections, we are talking about questions that involve the first house and the 7th house. There is no other house from a traditional Western astrological perspective that involves itself in the topic of love or romance or dating or courtship or sex or anything in the same way that the 7th house does. And by saying in the same way as the 7th house does, that might cause some confusion and make you feel as if other houses speak about love in some other way. And the answer to that is no. There is no separate house within the birth chart or the Horary chart for your boyfriend versus your husband. Both of these people are located in the exact same house, and that is the 7th house. The person who you're married to is in the 7th house. The person who you're cheating on your spouse with is also in the 7th house. These people exist in the 7th house, and they do not exist in any other house whatsoever. Today, there's this confusion amongst Western astrologers about the role that the 5th house plays within love questions. And I would like to emphatically put this to rest today and say that the 5th house plays no role whatsoever in love or courtship or hooking up or shacking up or being common law partners or any sort of hooking uppery that exists. The fifth house has nothing at all to do with that, not even in the slightest bit. When somebody asks you a question that has to do with love, the only house you go to is the seventh house. The seventh house. The seventh house. It will not change. It has not changed in over 2,000 years of horoscopic astrology, and it will never change because the seventh house is the house of love. In much the same way as the fourth house is the house of the father, your fifth house is the house of your children. Your fifth house might be the house of your procreative potential and abilities within this lifetime, but the fifth house is most definitely not the house of any sort of love or any sort of love situation within the context of Western astrological tradition. The seventh house is. I'm also saying this and I'm also stressing this because there are very famous horary astrologers who say otherwise. There are very famous horary astrologers who would have you sitting down here, scratching your head, saying, oh, maybe we should use the seventh house because this is somebody who she wants to marry. But actually, maybe we should use the fifth house because they're not married yet. But actually, she is moved to live in this man's country, so it's a little bit more serious than if they were just two people dating. Therefore, actually, it's a seventh house topic. But no, at the same time, they still haven't made the final vows yet, so it's a fifth house topic. There are some astrologers who will drag you straight down to hell on a jet ski with them because of this lack of clarity within themselves. It's kind of the same group who would have you think and say that the sixth house is the house of your job, whereas the 10th house is the house of your career. And therefore, when you come to ask a horary question, you are confused out of your mind because you don't know whether or not you should be using the sixth house because you don't know if you have a job or if you have a career. And lo and behold, you go on Google what's the difference between a job and a career, only to find out that those two words literally are synonyms and they mean the exact same thing. So Google can't help you, AI can't help you, and nobody can really help you because the people who you're expecting to help you can't even identify for you what's the difference between a job and a career. Because there is no difference between a job and a career. The 10th house is the house of our career. The 7th house is the house of all of our love interests. And when you ask a horary question, the 7th house will only serve to give you insight into those love interests. Definitely not the 5th house. So with that being said, we go to the 7th house now to investigate the topic of this woman's partner. Because we've already investigated who she is through the 1st house, now we're going to investigate her partner through the 7th house. If this were a natal astrology reading, I would begin the reading by assessing the planets in the 7th house first. Because in natal astrology, I hold that planets in a house are oftentimes more influential even than the planet that rules that house. So I would go and assess the planets in the 7th house first if this were a natal astrology reading. Since this is not a natal astrology reading, and since my fundamental goal within this chart reading is to understand the Querent, the Quesited, and their relationship to each other, I need to go and look at the ruler of the 7th house. Since we have 22 degrees of Aries, 18 minutes on the cusp of the 7th house, I'm going to go to Mars at 12 degrees, Gemini, 19 minutes, and accidentally debilitated in the 8th house. Now, I just so happen to know that Mars at 12 degrees of Gemini is Mars in his face or in his decan. As we know, the faces /decans/decanates, because they all mean the same thing, the faces or decans or decanates represent 10-degree divisions within a sign. So if every sign has 30 degrees, then a face/decan/decanate or decanate is 3 10-degree divisions within that sign. Within the sign of Gemini, the three decans or faces of Gemini are going to be Jupiter ruling the first 10 degrees, Mars ruling the second 10 degrees, and the Sun ruling the final 10 degrees. These are the faces of Gemini. Now, with that being said, I also know that within traditional horary astrology, especially horary astrology within the 17th century, our interpretation of the faces says that when a planet is in its face, it's like a man on his last gasp, or a family at the end of their bloodline who have no certainty about how their genealogy is going to be continued throughout time. That's what it means when a planet is in its face. Now, in the medieval period, in the times of Guido Bonatti and Avraham ibn Ezra, there was a different type of languaging that was used about a planet being in its face. Because according to them, when a planet is in its face, it's as if that person is wearing things that are beautiful, or it is as if that person is wearing beautiful adornments. Now, we don't know what they're wearing underneath those beautiful adornments, but according to Abraham ibn Ezra, as well as Guido Bonatti, when a planet is in its face, it's as if that person is wearing beautiful adornments, or something to that effect. Now, I've rooted much of my astrological practice in the 16th century, or rather in the 17th century, and as a result of that, I will stick with those aphorisms in assessing what is going on within this particular chart. So we can say that the native spouse, or rather the querent's boyfriend, it was really her fiance, is in a state where he is desperate and struggling, and where he doesn't actually know his head from his tail as far as the situation is concerned. He is a desperate man taking desperate measures within the world, and he cannot think in a way that allows him to be a robust husband figure for anybody at this moment, because he's trying to save all the last remnants of power and all last remnants of security that he can within the situation. And when a person is acting in that sort of survival mode, they really don't have much else to give to anybody else around them. So that could be the condition that he finds himself operating in, and that can be the space that he finds himself operating from within this question. Now, after we've assessed the essential dignity of the native, or lack thereof, really, of the native, we then go on to assess the accidental fortitudes or debilities of the planet that is signifying the querent's fiancé. We see that he is located within the 8th house. There is an ancient aphorism within astrology that states that if a planet is within the 8th house, with no reason for being in the 8th house, then that signifies anguish of the mind. The only reason a planet would have to be in the 8th house is if that planet were the ruler of that 8th house cusp. And within this chart, we see that we have 20 degrees Taurus, 40 minutes on the 8th house cusp. Therefore, the ruler of this 8th house cusp is not this Mars at 12 degrees Gemini, 19 minutes. The ruler of this 8th house is actually our Venus at 27 degrees of Pisces, 55 minutes in the 6th house. So here we have a scenario where a planet is in the 8th house with no reason for being in the 8th house. Therefore, whoever that planet represents is going to manifest anxiety within the mind, or anguish of the mind, basically. So here within this, we can say that not only is the querent's partner in a state where he is desperate and trying to figure things out for his own betterment, but probably the betterment for this entire situation, he is also someone who himself is suffering from a great deal of anguish of the mind, and by extension of that may be causing his fiancée to also be dealing with a great level of anxiety and anguish of the mind because of his own lack of ability to show up in a more robust way within their relationship. So that is our reading of the Mars in the 8th house. Now, there are two ways to interpret a house within Horary astrology, and I dare say within astrology in general. The first way is for us to interpret a house based on what that house means, i.e., 8th house is the house of death, anxiety, other people's money, for example. So we can interpret the house based on what it means, but we can also interpret the house based on the strength of that house. So we could say 8th house is a succedent house, and therefore it has 50% of power to express the will of any planet that is found within it. However, at the same time, the 8th house is a succedent house, but it's a succedent house that has no aspect to the ascendant, which means that it probably is just as weak as the cadent houses that don't have aspects to the ascendant as well, because to not have an aspect to the ascendant is to essentially not have aspects or access to the vitality that is necessary for you to grow and thrive within the specific chart. So that's what we see here. We see that, yes, my partner is in the house of anxiety and anguish of the mind, but we also note that even independent of that, he really doesn't have any power or any say-so within the current situation that they find themselves in. So he is weak both internally and externally, whereas she, as Venus at 27 degrees Pisces, 55 minutes, she is internally strong, even though she is externally weak. She has an internal body of resources that he can't even imagine. And so this is setting them up to be at very different places within this relationship. But even though she might be the one who is technically, quote unquote, stronger or better off than he is still exerting a great level of power on their overall union. So that is our assessment of the ruler of the first house representing the Querent and the ruler of the 8th house representing the Quesited. Now, the next place that we move on to within every horary chart is we take a look at the moon. And the reason why we have to assess the moon is because the moon is representing the psychic undercurrent upon which everything else is built. And when we see the moon based on the strength of the moon, based on the moon's essential dignity, we can say that the moon is doing strongly or weakly in general. And then we can also say the same based on the house in which we find the moon located. So here we have the moon at 21 degrees of Libra, 41 minutes, and this moon is Peregrine. We know the moon is Peregrine because the moon isn't in her domicile, her detriment, her exaltation, or her fall. The moon is in Libra, and the faces of Libra are the moon ruling the first 10 degrees of Libra, followed by Saturn ruling the second 10 degrees of Libra, followed by Jupiter ruling the final 10 degrees of Libra. So the moon definitely isn't in her face either. And since we know that the luminaries have no term rulership in any of the signs of the zodiac, we definitely know that the moon isn't in her own term either. Therefore, this moon is absolutely Peregrine. If the scaffolding upon which the entire topic is built is Peregrine, then that's an indication to me that what is being asked about doesn't have the sort of psychic fortitude necessary in order for it to come to pass in a way that is free and easy and uplifting and light. And that is essentially what we see here with this Peregrine moon. This Peregrine moon says that the native is lost, the native's boyfriend is lost, Everybody is confused about the current state of affairs, and nobody actually has the resources to do anything better about that current state of affairs, is what the moon is saying. Now, secondarily, we note that the moon is also conjunct the first house cusp, and also by the 5-degree rule should be considered to be in the first house. Where we find the moon within the horary chart often tells us where the client is most deeply focusing their own psychic connection to the question that's being asked about. And so here we see that the deepest psychic root within this question is the first house. And that's a statement to us that this native fundamentally, subconsciously, is most concerned about her own well-being in asking this question, should we marry? There's nothing else that she has any concern about other than, is she going to be okay? And insofar as that's the question that the native has, and the moon answering that question is fundamentally Peregrine, it's feeling as if it's highly unlikely for this to be an okay situation that we find the moon existing in within the situation. After we've done the rule of the ascendant, the ruler of the Quesited house, and the moon, we're basically ready to give our assessment. Now, there are some other things that I do, and I call them strange considerations, because they're interesting things that will possibly help me in my overall analysis of the chart. So, for example, strange consideration number 1 is the fact that we have Uranus in the 7th. In the horary chart having to do with love or romance, if we find Uranus in the 7th house, or I've even found in the 1st house, this can indicate the likelihood of separation and divorce within that relationship. So that is just one strange consideration, the fact that Uranus is present here within the 7th house. Another strange consideration that we find here is that the sun is here also in the 7th house. And when I look at the chart, I see that the sun is the specific ruler of the 11th house within this chart. And that can be an indication that for this woman, this man is representing to a very large degree the fulfillment of her desires and a fulfillment of prayer being answered over her life. So for her, she may still view this man as a point of deep desirability, whereas in the reality of the situation, he may not actually be capable of fulfilling any of her desires at all. So that's strange consideration number 2. First was Uranus in the 7th. Second was rule of the 11th in the 7th house as well. Third piece is that by the 5-degree rule, the moon is considered to be in the 1st house, because the 5-degree rule states that if a planet is within 5 degrees of the next house cusp and in the same sign as the next house cusp, we should consider that planet as being in that next house. And so here we have the moon at 21 degrees Libra, 41 minutes. And by the 5-degree rule, this moon should be considered to be a 1st house planet. Now, what makes this interesting is that this is a full moon chart with the luminaries opposite each other from both the 1st house as well as the 7th house. And I think that this is also very telling because it is speaking to the very strong sense of dichotomy and the very strong sense of tension and the very strong oppositional forces that exist within the overall relationship. There's another thing here that's interesting from a strange considerations perspective, and that thing is that not only do we have Saturn, a malefic, and Pluto, a modern malefic, in a square relationship to the ascendant and the descendant, but we also find a lot of that happening with the nodes conjunct the midheaven and the IC as well, which says that this chart is vibrating with a power that makes it stand completely out of time. This chart is carrying an ancient level of storytelling, because within this chart are all of these powerful titanic forces coalescing, all with the singular intention of telling this woman, no, this is not a person who you should marry. The luminaries in the first house and the seventh house, Uranus in the seventh house, Saturn South Node, and Pluto conjunct the IC and squaring the ascendant and the descendant. All of these factors together are coming together and saying that this is a powerful moment in which this woman is asking this question. This is something that cannot be blown out of proportion because the universe itself has presented this story to us only through the headlines. This is a story that has proportion. This is a story that has some gravitas. And the general momentum within this story is towards an absolute denial of the marriage between this woman and her partner. So with all of that being said, the next step became relatively easy, because within the next step, all I needed to do was go and identify and see if there were aspects between the Querent and the Quesited. And the answer is no. There are no aspects between Venus ruling the first house and Mars ruling the seventh house. For a lot of horary astrologers, it would be sufficient enough for us to say that that is the case. However, some people would push this Venus beyond the degree that she is to see if she's going to be making any other degrees in the near future. And the reality is the answer is still no. Because if we were to push this Venus forward, she would be at 28 degrees of Pisces and nothing would have happened because she is making no more aspects while she is in Pisces. And if we pushed her to 29 degrees of Pisces, still nothing would have happened because she has no more aspects to make until she ingresses into the sign of Aries. Therefore, from the perspective of the woman asking the question, there is nowhere else to go other than placing myself in someplace completely new and someplace completely different, like a whole new sign to exist in. Similarly, the next aspect this moon is going to make is going to be her square relationship, it seems, with Pluto at 23 degrees of Virgo, 8 minutes, and present within the fourth house of the father as well as the family. With the moon applying next to Pluto, and Pluto being a god of the underworld, this tells us that the situation, should she choose to stay in it, is only going to get considerably worse. And should she choose not to pursue this specific path or this specific option, then she will still go through a Plutonian ending process within the context of the relationship that she is currently in. So no matter how we look at it, whether we look at it as the two of them skipping down the aisle and living happily ever after, or if we look at it as the two of them breaking up and that is the Plutonian rift between them that needs to be mended, it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, the reality is that the end outcome of this seems to be one rooted in loss, but also one that is rooted in this pushing her forward down an evolutionary path where she probably can't even take a boyfriend or a fiance. So the path that she's on is a path that completely rearranges what the outline and what the outcome of this relationship looks like. And so advising her to stay in it or advising her to push past the adversity and to go forth with marrying this person seems like a foolhardy thing to do. But my judgment to her was that I did not think that this was a person who she should be marrying. At the end of our call, she hung up. She said thank you. And years later, I heard back from her and she said, Mychal, the reading that you gave me completely changed my life forever because within that reading, you told me that I should essentially move away and step away from that relationship. And that was the best thing I could have ever done. I moved back home to my country. I was warmly welcomed and warmly received. the guy who I was with was ultimately abusive and somebody who was really using and manipulating me. And I've never been happier, and I've never felt better about my life, and I've never felt better about a decision than this decision that I made with your help and with the help of the Horary Astrology. So thank you so much. And that was her feedback to me at the end of all of this. Now, admittedly, we could have looked at this chart and we could have gone directly to certain elements and said, okay, just based on what these things look like, the answer seems to be no. However, we also want to be able to provide a story and weave a story, because that ability to provide and weave a story is something that we will then take on into our natal astrological practice. So thank you so much for joining me here once again within this container and this vortex of storytelling. I sincerely enjoy being here and being able to tell these stories, and I'm so grateful for you for being here with me as well. If you have enjoyed and loved this two-parted Horary Astrology delineation, then by all means, please subscribe to the Oraculos podcast wherever you find us on the internet, and also join us this January 10th for our upcoming Horary Astrology Certification Program, where I'm going to be sharing with you all of the things that we do and all of the things that we didn't do within this reading, and so many more, so that you can have all of the tools and abilities that you need in order to be a profound and powerful and accurate and concrete Horary astrologer within the world to come. So thank you so much for joining us here. I sincerely love you and appreciate all of you. And I will see you once again next week when we dive into even more of this magical world of the astrology that we know and love. Until next time, have a good one. Bye-bye.